When no one knows the data strategy execution, the initiatives lose the momentum. Momentum is very, very important in executing a data strategy. And it's a continuous momentum that should be supported and carried on. Continuously measure and iterate based on the data feedback loops. And feedback loops is so important on this data governance, data management journey when executing data strategy.
All right, welcome back to the Data Reality Check, the podcast where data meets the real world. Today, we're tackling a question that comes up every data leadership conversation. Why do data strategies look great but fail to land? The decks are super polished, the ambition is there, yet months later, very little has changed on the ground. And to unpack this, I'm joined by Tobias, who work at the intersection of data strategy, governance, and the real world enterprise execution. Welcome, Tobias.
Thank you, Amy. Thanks for having me. Excited to be on this podcast with you today.
Thank you so much. To give a little bit of a background to the audience, Tobias is the data management platform lead for the DACH in the Middle East and LATAM at Informatica. So basically, he helps organizations navigate complex data transformations across governance, data quality, integration, platform adoptions. Have seen like success stories, but probably also a lot of horror stories. So what I find especially also interesting about Tobias' background is that he didn't come from data from the theory alone. He worked highly regulated environments as well, led financial reporting teams, dealt firsthand with the realities of compliance, accountability, and operational pressure. So that experience sum up, right, and give him this pragmatic view of why data strategies often struggle once they leave the slide deck. So, Tobias, I would like to start and to ground this conversation based on your experience. I know you've seen data strategy from multiple angles, like regulatory, operational, platform level right now. So when you're sitting today from this experience that you're having at Informatica, when organizations talk about data strategy, what do you think they usually mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, a great question. And to start with, awesome topic, right? One of my most favorite topics of them all because it's so critical and important in any data management / data governance journey. So basically, typically when organizations mention data strategy, they're referring to a high level plan, right? That outlines how they intend to collect, manage, analyze, and also use the data to support, and that's very important, business goals, right? And this often includes, or you said it out loud, data governance, data quality management. I was responsible at Bayerische Landesbank before joining Informatica, by the way. Technology or the IT infrastructure, analytics capabilities, and as you also said, compliance with regulations. And having worked in a highly regulated field as in finance or financial services, I can tell some of the anecdotes maybe later on. But coming back to your question, so this strategy aims to create a framework for turning data into a valuable asset. And in an ideal scenario, in an ideal world, it's not only a valuable asset, it's a valuable, actionable data as a product that is be consumed by everyone, ideally everyone in your company, right? It's not the case in real life, unfortunately, but everyone should have access to those valuable assets. And ultimately, we would like to help the decision makers gain the insights, improve efficiency, innovation, and also gaining a competitive advantage in today's world, right? Now, format-wise, it can come in different slide decks, highlighting the vision, the objective, the key initiatives. But normally, as I've already was working on a data governance policy or a data governance strategy, it comes in a paper in writing, hopefully not consisting of 160 pages. So, yeah, basically, it's usually crafted by leadership or specialized teams. Funny enough, I had my co-worker at Bayerische Landesbank. He was actually working on that. He was sitting in the same room like me, in the same office, head to head, face to face. And yeah, we were both working on that. Same working in the data governance team, but we were actually asked with coming up with a data strategy. And that should be focusing on the ideal state of management, data management, and the usage, right? If that answers your question.
Yeah. And As you said, ideally, because I talk to a lot of clients, right? And I see that they have already some sort of a strategy. There's some slide deck that basically is a lot of reference to Gartner, to
Mm,
McKinsey, to you name it, right? And at the end, it doesn't really align how the organization operates on a day-to-day basis. And
mm,
I find that there is a big disconnection, from what they would like to achieve to whatever they read on LinkedIn. Because I found this a lot with the heads from data for the CIOs and even CDOs. They are like, okay, I saw this company who did this, blah, 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 XYZ, got this revenue and blah, blah, blah. I want to replicate. But it doesn't fit all the companies, right? It depends on the organization, maturity, data,
exactly.
governance, and so on. How often does that meaning of data strategy, at least for you and your context right now, align with how the organization operates on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So here's where the challenge begins, right? So in many organizations, we have lofty goals and frameworks outlined in the data strategy, but they don't fully align with what you indirectly already said with the reality on the ground, right? So the day-to-day operations might be constrained by the legacy systems. We all know about the data silos, siloed data, and also the lack of skilled personnel, right? Or simply, and that's something we should also touch more upon, is the culture. Yeah, a culture that doesn't prioritize data-driven decision making. And there can be a gap between the strategic vision and operational execution. And teams may not have clear guidance and resources or incentives to actually follow this kind of laid out strategy. And often data initiatives become fragmented with different departments, pursuing their own solutions. And that leads to more inconsistency and also inefficiency down the line. Yeah. And what's also important to bear in mind is this misalignment, right, can cause the data strategy to remain a nice to have, a nice to have document. Same with data governance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe it used to be a nice to have, but I think it's a must have, especially with agentic AI, and all that we're talking about right now in these kind of days. So rather than a living, a breathing part of the organization's workflow, I think that should be the focus on, right? So from a nice to have to must have to a living and breathing a part of the organization's workflow, to repeat that. And the result, basically, organizations struggle then to realize the promised benefits of that data strategy, and leading to more frustration and skepticism about actually the real value of your data initiatives.
Yeah, I see that quite often. Actually, they want to focus not even in governance or in a strategy, but they are like, I want an AI strategy, as you mentioned, right? Or I want agentic AI. But if you don't have like the
Mm,
foundation, which is a
yeah,
must-have of governance in a data strategy, because at the end, the data products that you create are the base to create these AI products,
yeah,
it's not going to happen, right? It's going to have a lot of problems at the end of the day. I see this a lot with clients, and I have to be very bold and tell them, sorry, but you're going
mm,
to fail. Maybe you
yeah,
want to invest right now 1 million, half million in the next year doing agentic AI, but if you don't work on
mm,
your foundations, you're risking yourself also to not be compliant, for example, with the EU AI Act, right? Or things like this. The clients won't be happy. At the end, this is going to end up in a cemetery of AI products, and like they are going to end up next to the dashboards that no one uses. So I think this
exactly,
is basically another cemetery. Where
exactly.
do you see this execution of the data strategy once you put it together fall apart?
I mean, they the execution often falters in several key areas, right? And it's very rarely just one factor, right? Let's talk about ownership, right? The lack of clear accountability is a major culprit. Yeah, yeah. So when no one knows the data strategy execution, the initiatives lose the momentum. Momentum is very, very important in executing a data strategy, and it's a continuous momentum that should be supported and carried on, right? So ownership needs to be defined. Same within data governance, you have data owners, you have data stewards. So the clear roles and responsibilities need to be defined, but not just at the leadership level, right? So, but across all the teams that are responsible, let's say, for data quality, for analytics, and operational use. Yeah. Secondly, I think incentives is crucial. Yeah. If teams or individuals or your coworkers aren't incentivized to prioritize a data-driven behavior, the execution will stall and will halt, right? And incentives might be also missing or misaligned. Basically, people focus on the short-term deliverables but rather than the long-term data goals / the big picture, right? Thirdly, what comes to my mind is operating model. So we have the organizational structure and processes that may not support the strategy. Yeah? That might be outdated. Yeah? For example, I mentioned it earlier before, data silos, yeah, or fragmented systems, or even as importantly, the lack of cross-functional collaboration can also hinder this execution. And without an operating model that integrates the data into workflows, also the strategy remains only theoretically and not practical. Um, what else comes to my mind? I mean, skills and resources, also verbally mentioned it earlier. You need the right skills, the tools. Yeah. Maybe we can also talk about tools a little later on, or the budget, which we see many times right now when I talk to customers in these times.
Yeah.
But data initiatives, they require ongoing investment in talent and technology. Simples, right? If you have outdated personal or talent, basically, outdated talent and technology, then you're basically screwed, right? And last but not least, and I think that is probably the biggest obstacle or a critical point, is change management and culture, right? You've heard it many hundreds, millions times probably before. Data governance is change management, right? But also the resistance to change or a culture that undervalues data can block the execution. But without leadership driving the cultural adoption, data strategy struggles to take the root, right? So often what I'm trying to say is often these factors interplay with each other, yeah. But at the same time, they create a complex environment where the execution gaps widen even more. But change management, if you say, Toby, narrow down your lovely 5 obstacles to one or top one in that particular order, change management and culture is the top of, would be my list, personally speaking. I hope that
I
makes sense.
completely agree. I completely agree because I believe in this old framework of people, process, and technology, right? And sometimes you need to focus first on the people. I see a lot of companies spending millions, literally millions. I talk about it in my book. When you read it, probably you saw it there about how they want this shiny platform with all the newest technology, but maybe someone doesn't know how to use it because they don't have the skill set, right? And that happens quite often. Or how do you incentivize, as you mentioned, the people to use the new data catalog, or how to
Yeah.
use the new, let's say, data product marketplace or something like that? So I want to deep dive a little bit on these concepts.
Uh-huh.
How do you incentivize? What incentives do you give, for example, for ownership, for change management? How do you create a framework on top of that for adoption? Because as you said, and I completely agree because I have seen it, adoption is one of the hardest part,
Yeah.
which is part of the change management.
Absolutely. This is an excellent question, Amy. So let me structure my thoughts. How do I incentivize? Basically, and that starts from the scratch, from the bottom, right? Not only from the bottom of my heart, but already from the bottom is um, don't tell them you must do it. Yeah, tell them why they're doing stuff. I'm a huge fan of Simon Sinek. You probably heard of him in the Golden Circle. Always start with the why. Communicate the why. Yeah. Also start with the vision, right? Why we're doing things, and then tell them not only that they have responsibilities, they also give them power. Yeah, give them not only thinking of the data ownership, data stewardship roles, responsibilities. Tell them not only what they have to do, but what can they do? What can they actually impact? Yeah, they have decision power. Show them, in other words, show them what's in it for them, what's in it for you. Yeah, when you're doing things. I mean, analogy speaking, when my mother comes in my room, right, back in the days, and says, Toby or Tobias, you call me Tobias, right, because I've done something wrong. you must clean your room. At the end of the day, you do it, but do you do it with conviction? Yeah, do it enthusiastically? No, right? If you tell him, hey, you can clean your room, and then you can do other things in a more structured way and focus maybe on other projects and gain some valuable time in doing so, then you show them directly what's in it for you. I also think what's getting kind of overseen is gamification. You must smile, or hopefully I put a grin on your face, right? But gamification must never be ignored or undervalued, right? Underestimated. I've attended a great, probably the TDWI in Munich,
Yeah.
a huge conference. I've been there the last 3 or 4 years now and counting. And there's different presentations of different customers and people and great people. And also, they used gamification as in terms of data champion mugs, right? I don't know if you like coffee, drink tea, yeah. So they actually produced data champion or data hero mugs for something they've done nicely or done. Yeah? Maybe they rectified a data quality issue at the source, right? Or maybe they created more value in a business glossary and so on. What I'm saying is, in other words, to cut it short now, because I could talk about this for hours, as you probably know by now, right? You have to show them what's in it for them and celebrate the successes and make the successes transparent in the company. Might maybe use an internet newsletter, what you have achieved recently in the last quarter and so. Just a few ideas that come to my mind.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm super fan of gamification. Actually, even before starting in data, I was working as a software engineer slash product owner. And at some point for the software engineers, even to understand the roles of each one, because, software engineers, there's always an eternal fight with the QA people and also with the Scrum Master and the product manager. So it was a game from the Ministry of Testing, and they had cards, right? And it was like they have to change roles. So you have to put the software engineer in the stakeholder one and so on, and then try to communicate to create a feature. And they were able to understand, oh, this is how it feels to be here and there. Or recently, when I was pushing for adoption for a data catalog in some company that I worked a couple of years ago, I did ranking for them, right? So it was like, okay, we have these teams, the teams who put the most, it was by domains, divided by domains. So the domain that add more definitions, glossary terms, will get some merch from the vendor because we got some merch from them, and then a pizza party every quarter. It's something really silly, but the people got super motivated. They at the beginning, they were like, this is a hat I don't want to wear. I already have too many hats. This means more work. But I'm like, literally, you don't need to do more work. Just be accountable because you use this data every day. So you can be a business owner as well, right? For example, in this type of business owners, right? And that was super silly, but they loved just to get a coffee mug or a hat and then the pizza party because they are sharing between the colleagues, with a beer or something.
Yeah.
If they were remote teams, maybe we'll give a voucher from Lieferando or some, delivery food so they can just have a meetup together. And it's not going to cost much that on a quarter, but then the people is going to be engaged. So as you said, it's
key.
It's way to find them happy. Also, in the previous company before ThoughtWorks, at some point I put some ideas of putting, okay, these people are working on this project and they are using now Informatica catalog to put some stuff and so on. So let's put in the launch rooms that there are, screens, some news like, this team already improved their, I don't know, efficiency time in this percentage by using this or doing that, or, just like a little bit of a cheer up. So they will feel like, okay, I'm doing something good. And that's precisely what you said, right? And I really love that. I'm a super fan.
and yeah, I totally agree. And believe it or not, data governance can also be fun.
Exactly. That's what I tell people. They think it's just like boring regulations
it's
and you
boring,
have to follow.
Another regulation,
Exactly.
Let's get away from this police touch or character.
Exactly, the data police.
The data police, Let's get away with this.
Yeah, It's a complex topic, but I think people is understanding more and more how important it is during this AI era, right? Of course, there are a lot of cuts, as you mentioned, with budgets and so on, so that reduce a little bit the workforce for data governance and other topics. But again, as you mentioned also at the beginning, it needs to be part of the foundation. Is a must have there. Yeah, I want to touch another topic with you now that we talk about the whole transformation, right? I want to touch transformation fatigue because
No.
many organizations are not starting from zero, but they have many failed attempts already. So when the leaders say, I don't know, like we tried data transformation before and it didn't work, so they get very reluctant to try one more time. What do you usually find underneath on that statement? How do you get into them to try one more time and not be super defensive
Mm.
about that?
Well, what a term, transformation fatigue. Well, let's start with typically it refers to exhaustion and disengagement. People are just exhausted by another project, by another a data strategy. And as you said, data governance. Oh, we have to do. We have found another regulation and so on. But underneath this fatigue, you often find also the overload of simultaneous projects and initiatives that could lead to a burnout of your coworkers, right? Also, the lack of, I would say, visible progress or quick wins. Quick wins is so important. As a CDO or a leadership needs to actually show quick wins, right? Also on this journey. But this could cause skepticism, right? And maybe most importantly, poor communication. I don't want to repeat myself, but I do anyway. As I said, data governance is change management, but I've also learned over the last few years is it's also a change of communication. Right? How to communicate with people, right? You have to have a clear communication about the purpose and benefits of the changes, right? But also at the same time, insufficient support or training, to adapt to new ways of working is being underneath this fatigue, and the sense that changes are imposed rather than co-created. Yeah, also important. So essentially, it's a symptom of organizations pushing too hard, yeah, without pacing or addressing the people's capacity, capabilities, and most importantly, the mindset.
Yeah, I totally agree. Do you have maybe an anecdote for us of the warning signs that the fatigue is setting in from in a previous organization or clients that you had worked with? What are the red flags when you say, okay, they need to slow down and maybe find another way to do things?
Let's put it this way. I would say people are getting more and more disengaged, so the employee engagement will decline and the morale. Also, the rising turnover of absenteeism in key teams, the slower adoption of new tools or processes. Yeah. But that's also twofolded, right? It could be also transformation fatigue when you don't adopt new tools, but it could also be the tool itself that's not user friendly, right? So basically, let's put this in more context maybe later on. But basically, the drop in productivity or quality as focus shifts away from the core work. I think that are early warning indicators, red flags. What I experienced myself at my former employer before Informatica by Landesbank, I was asked to roll out as the former head of data governance, data ownership on a group level. And we already had in the bank we had functional and technical application managers. Those roles were already existent for decades before I came around with the data governance policy, right? Thanks to BC Best 239, by the way. But anyway, another regulation. So I was actually in meetings, multiple meetings with those functional and technical application managers, trying to convince them or even persuade them that they're gonna be a data owner going forward. But they resisted, right? That they were tired of this. They said, "Hey, we already have those roles, right? Well, why do we need to comply with another regulation, BC Best 239 in this case?" So, anyway, cut a long story short, I think that's also being asked from you and from your teams. Communicate clearly and have it as an ongoing communication. You can't expect to roll out and delegate data ownership in one meeting. And with some even department heads back then, right? I had to run multiple sessions, convincing people to accept the new role, to be acting as a data owner going forward. But again, what I said earlier in the beginning, to show them what's in it for them, give them more power, make them feel appreciated and valued, yeah? Even though they might have another roles and responsibility on top of that.
Yeah. I agree totally. A previous company that I work as well, when we were rolling out the data mesh, right? The concept already was like super scary for them because it was what is data? Why do we need why domains? Why I'm a normal product manager that needs to become a data product manager? And they were super resistant, and also the business owners to become a business owners. But at that time, my boss also wanted to call them like data stewards, all the Dama kind of names. And they didn't like these names. Why? Because it sounds overcomplicated, right? What is a data steward? It's not that easy, like owner or so on. So we minimize like the names and only like three type of owner: business, then the data engineer who owns the pipeline, and the data product manager who owns the domain. And we actually had some issues with the business people, but we were doing at that time some migration to the cloud as well for the on-prem. And it was a little bit difficult with them because we needed to escalate. Sometimes you even need to bring an escalation on top, right? They were the monetization team, to the monetization manager, for them to collaborate. And at the beginning, they were super reluctant. But when they stopped seeing, like, they had 5 definitions of revenue. One revenue was with returns, one without returns, one with this or that, and then numbers started to match their reports easily, and they have a single source of truth. They were super happy to own the data because they were the ones who collaborated to create the metrics, right? So, now we're going to have different definitions, and we will know one name or the other or how it works, each one. And they were actually at some point after, let's say 6-8 months, because it's not really fast, that this kind of change is not fast. They were the ones coming to the meeting and say, there is a data quality issue. I would like to give you this test case so you can change the deviation, or you can test the ranges or so on. But because they felt useful at the end, right? And it was not only their team using these metrics, some other teams that were really happy. So they felt like, okay, I did something for the company. And that's what you said is key, right? How this showing the impact or incentivize them, like feeling useful, right? During the process, using a hat, but then seeing some results out of it works.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
And I would like to talk now when the data driven becomes performative. So one phrase that I hear constantly is, it's everywhere on LinkedIn, it's in every single book, data driven. But in practice, it's more about performance. Like I have seen, for example, probably for you as well, it's like, we have data products, and it's basically 100 tables that they rename data products, and they think that's a data product. How do you tell when an organization is talking about data driven versus operating in that way? Because one thing is to want to look for the outside, like a very data driven data product and so on. And the other one is just a facade.
Yeah, good topic, good question. By the way, before I answer that, data driven must have been one of the front runners for buzzwords in 2024 or something, right?
I think so, but it's been there like for some time. But now,
I know. No, but you're
same
so,
as Gen AI,
right? Oh, I have so many more buzzwords. But anyway, yeah, as you said, right, Amy, many organizations proudly declare themselves data-driven, but the reality can be quite different, right? Simple as that. And signs that the companies or people are mostly talking the talk and not walking the walk is for instance, the heavy emphasis on data in presentation and strategy documents, but limited evidence of data influencing day-to-day decisions could be one, right? Another one is, and you already said it out loud when you talked about metrics, the reliance on metrics or KPIs that don't tie directly to business outcomes. And I'm talking about outcomes and outputs. Very important to bear in mind. Data initiatives that are siloed, right, with little cross-functional integration and collaboration. Also, dashboards and reports that are produced only for compliance or optics, rather than actionable insights, basically showing off with your dashboards, more to say. But also decision making that is largely based in intuition, hierarchy, or tradition, rather than their data itself, right? In contrast, I would say organizations that genuinely operate data-driven, are the ones who embed the data into the core of the decision-making. Full stop. All right. And using the data proactively, not reactively, proactively to identify more opportunities, to identify risks, reduce those risks, optimizing operations, also proactively improve data quality, in the long run. And encourage, maybe more importantly, a culture, I think I mentioned 3 times now, where questioning, assumption, and testing hypotheses with data becomes normal. Right? I think that's a little bit of the difference. Continuously, maybe to finish this off, continuously measure and iterate based on the data feedback loops. And feedback loops is so important on this data governance, data management journey when executing data strategy. And aligning KPIs and dashboards with their strategic goals. And ensure that they drive really meaningful action. We all like to have proper impact and driving meaningful action. I think that's one of the keys.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, because these bring us to another topic we'll have a little bit later on, which is data product thinking, right? Because it's a whole thing, right? So we will touch this a little bit further on the road. But yeah, I think that's the difference between a data-driven organization versus a wannabe. Let's put it that way, a wannabe, because it's just about these kind of companies that are not really data-driven and they call themselves data-driven are the ones who would like to have agentic AI today without any, foundations, just to put in their website powered by AI. So
that won't work. I can tell you this right away. That won't work.
Let's talk a little bit about strategies again, right? Because all of them, or a lot of them, are treated as something you define just once, and then you just roll out, and they don't give maintenance to this strategy. They don't see in the future what is coming, right? So it's really much messier than that. I'm curious about your view, because my view on it, it's more about you have to give maintenance to your data strategy, the same as the AI, especially in our landscape, right? That is constantly changing, new tools, new ways of working, new buzzwords, as we just said, and so on. Why do over-centralized or static data strategies struggle over time? Probably you have seen this in an over-regulated environments, right? That they are a little bit more static.
Yeah, I mean, the struggle is real, right? So, I mean, over-centralized strategies, they tend to concentrate the decision-making and control in a small group or only single function, right? And this, what it means is that this can lead to bottlenecks, right? And slowing down the responses to the changing business needs. And businesses will always change on the fly, right? There will always be changing. And also the lack of buy-in across the organization. Speaking of buy-in, by the way, so important to have the buy-in from the top management, from the senior management, when actually not only publishing those data strategies, but also implementing and executing data strategy. If you don't have the buy-in from the top stakeholders or top management, you're basically screwed. Right? Also, what comes to my mind is that central teams may be disconnected from the frontline realities, causing then the strategy to become out of touch. And static strategies are often rigid, right? They designed as a fixed plan rather than a flexible framework. It has to be flexible. It has to be also adjustable on the fly, to the changing business need, what I just said, But both over centralization and static design create a sort of set it and forget it mindset. We'd like to
Mm,
avoid that. Set it and forget it. Yeah, that's not going to apply, right? Which is basically incompatible with the dynamic nature of data and businesses, right? So
yeah.
as a result, I would say these strategies struggle to sustain momentum. Also, very importantly, their relevance and the impact over time and down the line. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Um, what does it take to design a strategy that can evolve without constantly restarting transformation? Because this is going to lead again to the previous topic we had,
Yeah.
the transformation fatigue, right? So, what can you do just not to restart, but just keep evolving with it?
Yeah. A few things come to my mind. First of all, designing a living with focus on living data strategy requires embracing the adaptability and continuous evolution, right? Embracing the adaptability, or what a word, and continuous evolution. Starting with, let's say, a decentralized empowerment. Yeah? You have to empower the cross-functional teams, yeah, to make the data decisions aligned with their domain. I think you mentioned a couple of minutes ago implementing data mesh or following a data mesh approach. One of those four pillars is decentralized domain-oriented ownership. That's very important with encouraging the local ownership innovation with a coherent strategic framework. Secondly, I would actually look at a modular and flexible framework. Yeah? So building the strategy in modular components that can be also updated independently, and also trying to avoid one size fits all mandates. I think that's also key. Something that I touched upon briefly earlier was continuous feedback loops. I think you have to embed mechanism to regularly assess progress, challenges, and emerging opportunities. Yeah? So motivating your peers to provide continuous feedback and use the data itself to inform strategy adjustments in real time. Fourthly, and I don't know, yeah, that's also something that's important is strong governance with agility. Yeah. As you probably know by now and found out maybe in this short period of time today, I'm a huge data governance fan. I think you have to establish governance that balances control with flexibility. You have to define clear guardrails, but at the same time avoid overly prescriptive rules that stifle innovation. Sorry, so you don't want to be coming across a ruler and regulator. Yeah, talking about the police touch again, when everyone rolls their eyes when they hear about data governance, and also a continuous or culture of continuous learning and adoption. Right, fostering a mindset that embraces the change, the need for change, basically, who can experiment and also learn from failure. I think you also should, as a leader, every leader or every company should actually support learning from failure. Okay, because we all make mistakes. You try to avoid making the same mistake, but you should be also obviously supported, motivated by learning that, and yeah, be brave, be bold, as we've been told, right?
That's a great advice for the people trying to put a data
Yeah,
strategy together. Uh,
exactly.
because yeah, you see a lot of headless chicken running around trying to do something. Unfortunately, if you don't do it in the right way since the very beginning, it's likely to fail. And again, what you mentioned about governance, right? I also like to have governance embedded in policy as code. So the transition is really smooth for the people working on a day to day, like, I don't know, masking for GDPR, right? Doing some control, data quality, and so on, to have it in this federated data governance, more conceptualized on that, right? With the data platform as well, but also get the feedback from the people, as you mentioned, right? It's really important to do these feedback loops all the time in your products that you are developing, but also in the governance as well, right? Because what is right now regulated might change tomorrow. Look, a lot of companies are struggling now with the EU AI Act because they are releasing new stuff and so on. I was talking today with some colleagues about banking, for example, and that so for some of the new offerings we would like to do, and it's we were talking about how they are adapting to, for example, in Europe to the EU AI Act, because they have models that have been there for ages that no one really touched much. And are they even white box or black box, right? Because now with these regulations, they need to take a look even to these old dinosaur models and see if they are compliant. But this only happens if they will have continuous feedback loop on these kind of models. They will have found, for example, okay, yeah, we need to do these changes before this and this and this and that, not running the last 2 months for implementation and changes before the law rolls out. So
Absolutely, I agree.
I want to quickly touch product thinking. Of course, that's a lot of it's a big topic, but I would like to see some of your perspective on that. As you know, I'm a big fan of that part as well. Um, you know that there is a lot of talk about moving from data projects to data products, and it's also became a buzzword with data mesh and so on. Everybody thinks everybody have their own definition of data products, and most of them are incorrect. And also, we have data as a product, right? But from your experience and your perspective, what does an organization need in place before product thinking can actually work?
Well, a lot of things, but let's start with a clear vision and strategic alignment. I mean, we talked about a vision briefly at the beginning. You have to have a clear vision because product thinking requires a shared understanding of business goals and customer value, right? Full stop. The organization basically must align around outcomes, not just outputs. Very importantly, also you have to empower cross-functional teams. Any data governance, when we talk about a successful data governance journey, can only work if you have alignment between business and IT, especially in terms of producing, consuming those data products. That's very key. Cross-functional collaboration, but at the same time, they need autonomy to make decisions and iterate quickly. You have to have a strong product leadership. So basically, that leadership must champion product thinking and provide support and resources, the clear priorities. You have to probably install a customer-centric culture, yeah? A mindset that is focused on solving real customer problems, not artificial ones that look good on paper or in a dashboard. Again, validated through continuous feedback. What else? Robust data and feedback mechanisms. Again, that's very important. But so is again a governance framework that enables autonomy. Yeah. So clear guardrails without micromanagement. I hate micromanagement, and I think everyone does. Right? Allowing the teams to innovate within the boundaries.
How do you balance the decentralization with governance without slowing everything down? Because it's really, really difficult. I get this question a lot, so I would like to see your point of view, because this balancing that is complicated.
I did just say it out loud, the guardrails. So defining clear principle and guardrails. What it means, you establish non-negotiable standards around security, around compliance and data privacy, right? These are non-negotiable, full stop, right? But at the same time, these guardrails also provide the boundaries within which teams can operate freely. And operating freely, again, without being micromanagement is key. Also, you have to enable local decision-making, yeah, by empowering the teams to make decisions quickly without waiting for centralized approvals. I'm also a fan of flat hierarchies, yeah, by the way. But trusting the teams with autonomy while holding them accountable for outcomes. Yeah. Accountability and showing and living the accountability is very, very important. I'm a fan of implementing a lightweight governance. By lightweight, I mean agile governance processes that focus on enabling rather than controlling. Yeah. Very, very important. Regular check-ins and transparent also reporting help maintain alignment without bureaucracy. What else comes to mind? I mean, we also talked about this, fostering a culture of shared responsibility. So again, encouraging teams to collaborate and share the learnings across the organization, either via internet newsletters or so on, right, to make it transparent. But also promoting transparency to catch issues early on and avoid, obviously, duplication. Last but not least, I would say leveraging also technology and automation. I like to say, also in my own vocabulary, data governance brings the three magic P's together. And with the three magic P's, I'm talking about people, the policies, and the processes. And ideally in a very highly automated way. So all enriched by data as the fourth pillar, yeah, to quote my coworker, Sid at Informatica, who actually wrote a book about that. But what I'm trying to say is technology is important, yeah, but it's not the only important. The most important thing is, or actually not to do, is ignore the human aspect of things. Yeah, always think of your people also first, have them engaged with controlling decision power and so on, have them act freely, but also support and drive accountability.
Yeah, I completely agree because I have the same vision from the very beginning, is business outcomes that you get executive buy-in by showing off results and some return of investment. So every time that you create a new product, this needs to be attached some way, somehow there. Otherwise, that when you ask for more funding, they will be like, what for? What is in it for me as a board member, right? To get more money out of it. And also involving the people before technology. Of course, I'm a fan. We have seen many good platforms doing nothing, just getting dust.
Yeah.
And people, I really believe in data product, human-centered design. I actually have quite a lot of templates and so on to understand really the needs and requirements, right? One of the things that always comes to my mind, this is we already been doing this for years in software engineering. This is already a concept that has been there, but we need to translate this to data. And this is what we are trying now, right? To make this more agile, as you mentioned, right? Like have more design and feedback loops um, and more involvement of the people, and think about designing a real product, not just a dashboard, right? Like before, there will be a central data team is, hey, I need a dashboard. Okay, I'll give you in 2 weeks. Sure. And then the data engineer or the analyst will create something that it thinks is okay. And then the user will be like, I don't like this. This doesn't work for me. And then the eternal fight will start between stakeholders and data people, which is, I hope it will fade away over time.
Yep.
I will love to have a couple of final reflections from you for the audience. So the first one, what's one piece of advice you will give to the leaders who feel stuck between strategy and execution?
Only one piece of advice? It's very hard to summarize that. I would actually start with, or my advice would be to focus on building bridges, not barriers. When you feel stuck between strategy, execution, again, empower your teams with clear ownership and autonomy to adapt the strategy as they execute, and invest. And that's very, very important for any leaders out there. Invest in ongoing communication, also in appreciation and rewards. Talk about making data champions, build data champions, gamifications, and also showing quick wins and celebrate quick wins that keep the momentum alive. Obviously, there's more that come to my mind, but if I had to summarize those, that would be the top 3 or top 1 of advice you asked me to share.
Thank you. And the second one is, what is one common belief about data strategy or governance that you think is actively holding organization back?
Again, more common beliefs come to my mind, and also we mentioned it a few times now in the last, 45 minutes or so. One of the beliefs is still that data strategy and data governance are primarily about control and compliance. And again, changing the mindset from a nice to have to must have, talking about data governance as the foundation for agentic AI successes down the line is so important. But you, me, and everyone else, every data governance leaders are out there, seasoned data leaders, data management enthusiasts, they must come across and deliver the message that is not primarily about control and compliance, about regulations. It's also about creating added value and making your life, your day-to-day life easier, what you do and what you like doing at work.
Great advice. Thanks so much. Toby, thank you so much for your wisdom. I really appreciate the time you talked to me about this important topic. I don't want the data governance to fade away, never. So I'm always a fan to having people who talk about it. And it's been very thoughtful and an honest conversation. I really loved it.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks so much again for having me. And again, thank you for listening
Thank you.
and dialing in.
Nice. For our listeners, if today's discussion resonated with you, it's probably because many of us are dealing with the same challenges over and over again: great intentions, strong strategies, and a very real organizational constraint. At the end of the day, making data work is not about the better slogans or the shiniest AI or data platform. It's about designing a strategy with execution in mind. So you've been listening to Data Reality Check, where data meets the real world. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch up next time with more real talk from the front lines of data and AI. So stay data driven. Thank you.